Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jaime Lee and I'm a mixed media artist, and here on my channel I do time-lapse art videos, I do art tutorials, I talk about art supplies, and I also like to do what I call weird art videos, which is videos where I talk about paranormal art, art conspiracy theories, art Mandela effects, and things like that. So if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, please hit the subscribe button if you would like to subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell for notifications every time I post new videos. Today's video is more in the category of weird art, not quite as weird as some of the stuff I've already talked about, but I figured today I would like to talk about why art history doesn't suck. The reason why I wanted to make this video is because when I was back in college, I took art history and I found it to be incredibly boring. I just remember the class was not interesting to me at all. I knew I had to take it. I knew I loved art, but there was just nothing about it that really seemed that interesting to me. Really, the only thing interesting that happened that I can remember was that we took a trip to Boston to go see the Boston Museum of Art and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which was the inspiration for my Isabella Stewart Gardner two-part video on the theft of paintings from that museum and why it's the world's largest unsolved art mystery. So if you'd like to check out those videos, I will leave a link right here. And now that I do art pretty much all the time and I learn a lot about art history and famous painters, and I've even copied some paintings from history, I realized that art history doesn't actually suck. It's not that boring. It's actually really interesting, and there's so many weird, strange things that have happened in art history. There's so many characters in the art history world that are just fascinating. And I was thinking about how bored I was when I was learning about art history and how it doesn't bore me at all now because it seems like there's so much fun and interesting information. If that sounds interesting, stick around and we will get into it right now. My first art history story, tale of the weird and interesting, is about Michelangelo. Yes, that Michelangelo. And it's basically that when Michelangelo was supposed to paint the Vatican's Sistine Chapel, which is one of his obviously most well-known works and has lasted throughout hundreds of years of history, what many people don't realize is that he was actually supposed to fail at painting the Sistine Chapel. The commission to paint the Sistine Chapel was actually a setup and was supposed to make Michelangelo into a laughingstock. He was a rising star, becoming really well known as a sculptor, and had a lot of fame and also kind of a big head, supposedly. So there were some people that wanted to take him down a few pegs, and obviously this backfired horribly. So what happened? Donato Bramante, the architect of St. Peter's Basilica, and Raphael, yes, that Raphael, no, not that Raphael, told Pope Julius II to hire Michelangelo, knowing he was a sculptor and not a painter. He'd done some painting, but that wasn't what he was known for, and it really also wasn't what he was comfortable with. So these two believed that if Michelangelo was hired, he would fail and be humiliated, or at least he'd be tied up painting this darn ceiling for a really long time, and it would allow other people to kind of become more famous than he was. Why would they do that? Why would they care if he was tied up painting the ceiling, or why would they want to see him purposefully fail at something they'd recommended him for? Well, as high school as this sounds, this is the reason. It all started because Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, yes, that Da Vinci, who was a friend to Bramante and Raphael, had huge egos and tried to constantly outdo each other. Also, Michelangelo was not exactly affable. He was known to be a bit of a difficult guy. Let's put it that way. So when the Pope approached Michelangelo, he initially tried to refuse the job. He considered himself a sculptor, and he had no experience whatsoever with frescoes, which is what the Sistine Chapel required. But, I mean, he's the Pope, so what are you gonna do? So in 1509, Michelangelo started painting the Sistine Chapel. And he devoted 4 years of his life to doing it. He was a methodical and pretty serious worker, and so he just doggedly started at the east end of the chapel and went to the west end and kind of improved as he went. He had a lot of talented people that he recruited to help him with it, and contrary to popular belief, they say that he actually didn't spend the whole time laying on scaffolding to do the ceiling. He actually built scaffolding specifically for where he was working at, and he and his workers would stand and just look up and paint the ceiling. So I guess that was just more of a fun way to describe it. So it turns out at least once while the Sistine Chapel painting was in progress, Bramante, who had a key to the chapel, let Raphael in to see what Michelangelo was up to. I mean, maybe they were checking to see if he was failing as they had hoped. However, it was kind of the ultimate karma when Raphael saw what Michelangelo was doing. He was so overcome by what he saw that he went to his own painting, which was a fresco that was in progress at the Stanza della Stegnatura. And he either did one of two things. I found two different stories. One's a little more sensational than the other. One story says that he went to his in-progress fresco and scraped it off so that he could start using Michelangelo's techniques to do his fresco because they were better. Other stories say that he actually went to his fresco to paint Michelangelo into the mural and kind of put him as a seated figure toward the front of the fresco. Or maybe both is true. Maybe he did scrape some of it off and he also put Michelangelo in there. Their grand scheme to discredit Michelangelo and make him into a huge failure by recommending that he paint the Sistine Chapel was obviously a terrible idea because it literally cemented Michelangelo into history and probably also brought him a lot more fame and ego stroking in his lifetime. So that just goes to show anytime that you are hoping to discredit somebody by humiliating them and making them look like a fool, probably you should just stay away from that idea because it might backfire horribly like it did here for Raphael and Bramante. For this next little piece of art history, we're going to move from the 1500s to the 1800s, and we're going to talk about Renoir. It turns out that Renoir painted for over 30 years of his life with a very debilitating condition. Pierre Auguste Renoir was one of the leading Impressionist painters. He was born in France on February 25th, 1841, and over the course of his lifetime, until his death at the age of 78, he painted over 4,000 paintings. Yes, 4,000. Despite the fact that he spent 30 plus years struggling with rheumatoid arthritis, which badly disfigured his hands and caused him immense pain. And he even had a stroke in 1912. And yet, he still kept painting. As a child, Renoir's family moved to Paris near the Louvre Museum. He was apprenticed to a porcelain painter. He took free drawing classes, and he attended the École des Beaux-Arts, which was a well-known art school. His star slowly rose, and he became well-known during his lifetime. But in 1892, when he was 52 years old, he started being afflicted by rheumatoid arthritis, which became progressively worse by 1903. As the disease progressed, his hands became increasingly disfigured and deformed, which really hurt his ability to do art. Despite this, he remained an incredibly optimistic and positive person throughout his whole entire life, according to all sources that I found. He traveled many times to Europe to seek treatment for many things that this disease brought on. Hand disfigurement, ankylosis of the shoulders and elbows, a loss of mobility, which he had to adapt himself to using wheelchairs and special seats that were made for him so he could continue painting and making art. And he also had a special painting wheelchair that held him in the correct position for painting because he was no longer able to hold himself in that position. Later works by the artist featured less intricate backgrounds, and the paintings had more of a definite focal point. Many think this change in style came about because of his condition. because his earlier paintings had really detailed backgrounds and there was a lot of things going on throughout the whole painting. But in his later years, even though according to everything that I saw about Renoir, all of his paintings were very beautiful, very positive, very happy paintings, but they became less detailed in the areas that didn't matter because it was much harder for him to paint as time went on. So as I said, his paintings still were happy and positive paintings, beautiful paintings, colorful paintings, and he still challenged himself even as he was dealing with this condition, even as he was in pain. He challenged himself by becoming really innovative with the way he adapted things so that he could still paint. And remember, we're talking about the late 1800s and the early 1900s here, so there wasn't a lot of help or advancement for people that had these kinds of disabilities. So he was kind of really on the edge of that, kind of coming up with ways that he could live with this disease and still do what he loved. So how did he handle this? Well, to do his really big paintings, he used a cylinder and crank system to move the painting or the canvas to his hand rather than having to move his hand to the canvas. Later, he would have to have a brush placed in his cloth-wrapped hand by an assistant because he could no longer effectively pick up his brush and place it in his hand correctly. His palette was placed between his knees when he couldn't hold it anymore. And then after that, the palette was actually attached to his wheelchair so it could swivel in order for him to get to the colors more easily. As he aged and the disease worsened, he began to enlist the help of his pet cats, who would sleep on him and keep him warm while he painted. After his 1912 stroke, he took up sculpting because, hey, that's what you do, right? And even with doing that, he later directed his assistants to sort of be his hands. So he would tell them how to sculpt and what to sculpt, and they would do it as he told them. He painted right up until his death, and he even saw one of his paintings bought by the Louvre Museum in the year of his death, 1919. So the next story I have to talk about that I found really interesting is that Gustav Klimt, who was a famous painter known for his gold leaf paintings and his mosaic style and his paintings of beautiful women, well, Gustav Klimt was kind of a weirdo. Klimt was born outside Vienna, Austria in 1862. His mother was a failed opera singer. She had this dream of being a singer, but family obligations really just kind of stood in the way and she was never able to achieve her dream. I find that to be really sad, actually. And his father, Ernst, was the person who taught his kids basically how to paint. And so he saw painting as something that was a great skill for them to have. And the first thing that happened to Klimt that really kind of changed his life and made him think about the world differently, he lost both his father, Ernst, and his older brother, also named Ernst, in the same year. They both died in 1892. Klimt was hit really hard, and he also felt this huge weight of responsibility with both his father and his older brother being gone. He saw himself as being, the responsible one for his family now. Luckily for Klimt, he had attended the Vienna School of Arts and Crafts, or Applied Arts. He received the Golden Order of Merit from Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, and he was also made an honorary member of both the University of Vienna and the University of Munich. He also went on to found the Vienna Succession, which was an organization that was meant to help young artists get their art out into the world. So he had skills and he had talent, and he was able to make money as a working artist, and in fact throughout his life he made a lot of money working as an artist. But he was a bit of a rogue. So one time he was commissioned to paint 3 paintings for the University of Vienna. He was supposed to paint one representing medicine, one representing philosophy, and one representing jurisprudence. He got into doing this commission job and he did his sketches and he brought them to the people in charge to show them and started working on it, and they hated it. They hated what he was doing. They said it was basically not what they were looking for, didn't represent what they wanted it to, and it was pornographic, which it kind of was. I mean, naked people, everything in great detail on the walls of a university building. Yeah, it was pretty graphic. But this pissed off Klimt because he didn't like being told what to do with his art. That was the whole reason he founded the Vienna Succession in the first place. He kind of retreated to his house and just kind of did his paintings his way in the style that he liked doing them. Turns out he was really successful that way, and he never really had to worry about pleasing any society, you know, norms again, because he didn't really take on any more commissions like that. It was too much of a headache for him, obviously. So probably his most famous works are his gold leaf, mosaic, symbolism works like The Kiss, and also his portraits of well-regarded and high society women. And he became very famous and very sought after for doing these paintings during his lifetime. And he didn't really have to go out and seek the work. The work literally would like show up right on his doorstep, and he would be asked to paint these paintings for wealthy men of their wives. It became sort of like a status symbol of wealthy women in Vienna to have their portrait painted by Klimt, which is kind of funny when you go on to the next point I'm going to talk about, which is that Klimt was kind of obsessed with all things sexual. He even described painting as being erotic. He was very discreet during his life, did not get himself into scandals, but number one, he appreciated having his female models close to him. He often would have many models around his studio. He was a womanizer. He never married during his lifetime, but he had a reported 14 children, and it's not known with whom he had those children. So he often had one or more women around his studio. His models, a lot of them were known prostitutes. Here's the kicker. He was well known for spending his days in his studio wearing basically a blue house dress or smock. Here's a photo of the one that he always wore. And underneath that blue smock, he pretty much just let everything run free, if you know what I mean. A studio full of women, a man in a house dress, going commando, 14 illegitimate kids, well, you do the math. Not only was he into the more erotic side of life in real life, but also in his paintings and drawings, and later in life, his drawings were actually quite explicit. So as far as his paintings go, here's a completed painting that is representative of the kinds of portraits that Klimt did. Now here's one uncompleted work. It is called The Bride. This was on Klimt's easel when he died. His underpainting is a very graphic and anatomically correct nude that he then painted the clothes over with his gold leaf symbol mosaic style that he was famous for. It kind of makes you wonder, is this how he painted all his paintings? As nudes first and then just cover them up with clothing later? Judging from this, that is a possibility. Now, another weird fact about Klimt, despite his love for many women and his skirt-chasing ways, his longest and most intimate relationship was with his sister-in-law. His brother Ernst married his wife, and the wife's younger sister was this woman that became pretty much Klimt's lifelong companion. Who was she? Emily Flogue. She was a very talented clothing designer and also an independent businesswoman, which was very different for the time that they lived. Now, Gustav and Emily were friends, they were creative partners, and they were pretty much as close as you could get to soulmates without being in like a love relationship, which it's not really known whether they were actually in that type of relationship or not, but they were incredibly close for 27 years. But whatever the relationship is, it was the most important relationship in his life, and even on his deathbed, his pretty much last rumored words anyway were "send for Emily." Some other fun and weird facts about Klimt is that he lived with his mother his entire life, and he was a cat lady in a man's body. His favorite cat was named Katze, I guess. And he loved his cats. One time a person at his studio noticed that his cats were kind of running all over the studio and literally peeing on Klimt's sketches. And so when this person mentioned it, Klimt actually said his cats piss on some of his sketches and it's the best fixative. And it actually wasn't. A lot of his sketches were ruined because they were destroyed by cat pee. So Klimt produced a lot of art in his lifetime, which actually wasn't a super long lifetime. He actually died, fairly young at the age of 55 in 1918. He had pneumonia and he also had a stroke that paralyzed part of his body, I believe. And then he was struck with none other than the other global pandemic pandemic, the 1918 Spanish flu, which is what finally did him in. He only grew in fame and popularity after his death, and his art was the subject of much interest and controversy even in the years after he died. Some of his paintings were seized by the Nazis during World War II. 14 of them were burned when they took basically a safe storage facility where a lot of Klimt's art was, and they pretty much burned it to the ground, and a lot of the works that were in there were lost. Family of one of the paintings that was taken engaged in a long legal battle to get the painting returned to them. The subject of the painting was Adele Bloch-Bauer. She was one of his most famous paintings, and she was a very high society woman at the time that she was painted. Her portrait was done by Klimt a couple of times actually, but this portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer was one of his most famous paintings, and it was not in the possession of the Bloch-Bauer family until their legal proceedings actually were found in their favor, which did not happen until 2006. And when that happened, that same year, the family sold that painting at auction, and it ended up being the most money ever paid for a work of art at auction, $135 million. So the final story I'd like to talk about is something that is a little bit different, and you may have heard of this condition, I guess you would call it, or ability. Even today, it's just now being studied in a way that explains kind of how it works and that it actually is a real condition. So what we're talking about is a condition called synesthesia, but the artist that claims to have had this condition, some people believe him, some people don't, was named Wassily Kandinsky. Many people refer to Kandinsky as the father of abstraction. Kandinsky was born in Moscow in 1866, and even as a child he was fascinated with color. And in fact, when he was using his childhood paint set, he actually described when he was mixing his paints that each color that he mixed hissed at him, and he heard a certain hissing for each color. Which, I mean, on the one hand you could say, well, that's a really odd thing, and on the other hand you could say, well, he was a kid, and you know, kids have a different way of seeing the world, so who knows. People who do believe that he had synesthesia point to this as one of the reasons why he may have been dealing with this throughout his whole life. However, even though he was into art as a child, obviously, and he had this experience, he was not an artist for much of his young adult years. He was actually a lawyer, and he was pursuing a law career until 1896, when he was 30 years old, when he had an experience that literally changed his whole life. In 1896, he went to see an opera in Moscow. It was Richard Wagner's Lohengrin, and while he was watching the opera, he had an experience that totally changed everything, pretty much everything he did for the rest of his life. Kandinsky said of his experience at the opera, and I'm going to read this, his quote directly was, "Violins, deep basses, and above all wind instruments embodied the full power of the twilight hour in my imagination. I saw all my colors in my mind. They were all before my eyes. Wild, almost delirious lines were being drawn right in front of me." After having this experience, he abandoned his law career and decided to become a painter instead. He painted from 1907 to 1939, and he described painting as similar to composing music. People that talk about Kandinsky's work describe it as a cycle of symphonies and concertos. And he even named his artwork after musical terms with titles like composition and fugue and improvisation. Most of Kandinsky's works were abstract, and he believed shades of color work together just like chords in music work together. The way Kandinsky's synesthesia worked, he described it like colored hearing. So for him, color and music went together, and there was no separation between the two. He also gave specific emotion, like emotional qualities to different colors. Certain colors had specific meaning to him, and his wife Nina said that he even had particular smells and a musical sound for each color. Once Kandinsky took the turn from being a lawyer to being an artist, he pretty much embraced being an artist completely. He even wrote a book called On the Spiritual in Art, and he spent a lot of time, you know, writing and talking about his experience with art and music and how they work together, and kind of trying to explain his theories. A lot of it was kind of out there for a lot of people, but they did appreciate his art. Now, also a lot of people really debate whether he actually had synesthesia or not. Some people point to the fact that it started when he was young, and you know, he really did have this seeming quality of being able to associate music and hearing with colors, so he heard colors when he heard sounds. But a lot of people kind of debate whether, number one, whether it's actually a real condition and whether he actually had it, because Kandinsky was incredibly proud of his Russian heritage. He felt very much like tied to his homeland, and he was very proud of being Russian and all of the things associated with that. Hi, Stella. Are you gonna let me finish the video, please? So that's cool, right? To be really proud of your heritage and to feel a connection to it. Well, it turns out that around this time that Kandinsky was doing his art and thinking about his heritage, it was very Russian to have synesthesia. There were a lot of Russian artists and public figures who claimed to have synesthesia, and not only synesthesia, but the particular synesthesia that Kandinsky claimed to have, which is the association of sound and sight, basically, which, according to one research article that I found, said that this is one of the most common forms of synesthesia, while another article I found said that it was a more rare type of synesthesia. So for all these Russian people to be having that particular condition at that time seemed a little suspect. But whatever the case, Kandinsky really believed truly in his soul that this was his experience of life and that this was true for him, and he even found a person who really was compatible with, you know, how he saw the world. He actually met the composer Arnold Schoenberg in Vienna in 1911 after hearing the composer's concert, and the two men began a long love-hate friendship. They were really drawn to each other and really had a lot of similar views and ideas, and they worked on, you know, creative projects together, but they also were kind of like oil and water. Whatever the case, whether he really did have synesthesia, which today a lot of people, you know, knowing what we know now from being able to research it more thoroughly than they did back in, you know, say 1911 or whatever, really do feel like, because of the way he experienced the world and how he described it, that he probably did actually have it and that it is a real condition. It wasn't just something, you know, he made up. What is true is that this condition that he had, or this belief that he had this condition, really brought him to be able to create this amazing abstract artwork that was new and innovative. Hopefully this helped give you a little bit more of a fun look at some art history, and I hope you liked it. If you like videos like this, please let me know and I can find some more crazy and weird stories from history, because trust me, there are plenty out there. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you are interested in more videos like this, or videos of my weird art tutorials, anything related to mixed media art. Please ring the notification bell if you'd like to be notified when I post a new video, and I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! Oh. Yeah, there's nothing else to do, I guess. That's it. Subscribe, hit the bell. Duh. Oh, here we go. Why not? That's my reasoning. Why not? What's the word that I can use on camera that's not offensive? So let's stop there. Which became progressive. Stella, do you gotta do that right here? Oh, that's just the table. Yeah, I'm talking to you. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I know what it is. So the way Kandinsky synesthesia, damn it. No, it's not really a story.